Thank you so much for having me here again. Did anybody see my presentation a couple of months ago? Oh, cool. Awesome. I'm an editor full-time that started a YouTube channel and slowly turning from an editor with a YouTube channel to a YouTuber who also edits. And it's been about 2 years, been exciting. And recently I was contacted by Tristan Lauriard, who's a Canadian artist, and he said, hey, I made an audio documentary about creativity and how you can spark it, how you can like find ways to be more creative when you're running out of juice. And I listened to it. It's a 1-hour documentary that I could highly recommend. Actually, in the YouTube video, I linked to it. And he asked me, was I interested in remixing it, which is sort of a creativity hack, to turn it into a video. And I listened to it and I decided, or I asked him, could we do 8 videos so that we can actually spend time on each hack and devote more, give more examples of each hack. What he did in his documentary is sort of more for art in general, so it's a lot of poetry and music, computer games. And I wanted to just adapt it and turn it into more filmmaking. What can we do as filmmakers to make sure that we can stay creative? And we are about to release the second video. This is the first hack that we did, and that was constraints. And so this one, I'm just going to show you the video. I cut it down to 3 minutes, and not going to talk about this specific hack, but then I'm going to start talking about all the other ones. So here we go. When director Danny Boyle filmed 127 Hours, he built an exact replica of the canyon without fold-away parts or doors. The crew asked him, what's the point of building a set when we can't move it? Don't you want better access for the camera and lights?
So you made it harder for yourselves, effectively.
Because we thought otherwise we'll cheat, and you'll spot a cheat quite quickly. You'll get a sense that they're cheating, you know, that the camera's cheating.
Danny Boyle intentionally refused the luxury of a flyaway set in order to make a better film.
He wanted the visual vocabulary of the film to develop out of the restrictions, you know, that the cameramen and James had to work out how to be able to shoot it.
By trapping the camera, he in essence trapped the viewer in the canyon with a character. He deliberately put a constraint on his creativity.
Help! I'm in the canyon! Help!
In this video, I'm starting a new series that aims to help you take your project to the next level. A constraint is something that limits the range of a person's action or freedom. While this might not be such a surprising technique, it is extremely effective, especially for the beginner. You have less variables to ponder, less of a chance to be overwhelmed. It could be cheaper or more interesting.
So I came up with this idea called the Boring Room Challenge. Kobe and I took about 2 hours and we made a short little scene using just this room and this hallway and the existing lighting.
When the obvious choices are unavailable, what's left can be either iterative or innovative, allowing you to tell the same story better or create something new and exciting.
If you go there, you'll find what you're looking for.
Many people believe that the more freedom you have as an artist, the easier it is. But surprisingly, the opposite is true.
Constraints aren't the boundaries of creativity, but the foundation of it.
With any project, many restrictions are already given, like budget, level of talent, and laws of physics. But sometimes you have to deliberately give yourself restrictions in order to challenge yourself. Like Jesse Vogeler, who created an entire short film only using footage from NASA and a green screen.
This is Control. How can I be of service today?
What happened? Put Mum back on.
Oh, sorry. You must have been routed back to me.
Just patch me through to Jess.
Okay, I can do that, but it's actually going to cost you extras. You haven't upgraded to our premium data plan yet.
Just call her.
Okie dokie. Won't be a tick.
Here's my advice on using constraint deliberately. Write small, something you can shoot today, without being dependent on anyone saying yes to you. Limit locations, number of actors, and gear. Set yourself a deadline, and when you start rolling, give it your best shot. Follow through, and most importantly, publish the end product. You learn most from the audience, and when you do this again and again, you turn your creative thinking into doing, something you get addicted to.
We can see all the stars like the sky for miles.
Thanks for watching.
So come on, let's forget about our lives for a while. Just escape.
Thank you. Did you guys recognize some of the movies at the end? Some of the restraints that you know of? You want to call some out? Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Moving on. There's a good discussion about these movies actually on the video, so you can follow along. Actually, the first comment on there is, can you identify all the movies? And so far, I think they identified 10 out of 16. Is that me? Okay. Okay, so moving on, next hack. It's going to go faster now. It's shape-shifting. And so what I do with these videos is I'll try to find movie examples, but I also usually try and find something in another art form. To give an example, so in the first video I actually cut that out. There was a computer gamer that was a composer and who was restricted by the way how he could compose the music through the old computer he was using. In this one, the example I'm using is actually the Guggenheim in Bilbao. And I think it's a great example of shape-shifting because Frank Gehry, the architect, when he was assigned to create a building, he started sculpting. And he was using all kinds of just ideas and forms, like you could see potentially there's some waves, some fish, some flowers, all kinds of things. So he doesn't really think about structure first or architecture or function. He thinks about form first. And so he applies something from a different form, and then he transforms it into architecture. And what's really interesting about this building is it actually, when you look at it from different viewpoints, it looks different. So when you're actually looking towards the south, it blends into the city. You can't see any of the, like what it's famous for, the metal warped titanium metal building. It really blends into the cityscape. But when you look at it from the city out towards the water, then you have all those soft lines that the building is famous for. And then when you start moving around and you look at different angles or you focus in on certain parts, you start to realize, oh, this could be like a cruise ship. This could potentially be a wave here on the left. The top of the building is kind of a flower, and at the bottom, when you sort of look at it, that looks a little bit like a fish, the way it's curved, with sort of the head cut off and the tail cut off. So he's done that, and by doing this, he's created something that turned a city that sort of was in decline, was an industrial city, now into a cultural megacenter. And people are seeking out the city, and it completely transformed tourism for the city and the economy. And so by using something very unconventional, he was able to create a piece of art that's very creative and transformed the purpose that it has. And just looking back at the beginning, the top half of that building is actually unused. There's nothing in there. It's just there for shape. All the galleries, there are 20 galleries in the building. They're sort of in the first 3 layers, which is half of the building. And he sold them that, and they were like, okay, yeah, we pay for that. That's cool. So now I was looking for, okay, what movie could I find that uses this model of shape-shifting? And I found a successful example, which I think is Pirates of the Caribbean. You take a theme park ride and you turn it into a movie. Not so successful would be the Emoji Movie. But Braveheart, and I didn't know this before, is actually based on a poem. The whole movie is created and inspired by a poem. And another example that I'm going to bring up here is this movie. Anybody recognizes this film or this still? What is it? Enter the Void, yes. Enter the Void is, any idea what the shape-shifting could be? Sorry? Yes, exactly. It's based on a Tibetan book about the afterlife. And he creates this really interesting first-person point of view story where we get to experience the dying of a person. This guy gets shot and he's on drugs, and we get to experience his experience. And I'm going to show you a rough cut of the first minute of the video that we're about to release. And just every once in a while, you notice it goes to black. It sort of symbolizes the blinking. So at some point, you realize, oh, I'm actually inside the head of this guy the whole time, and it just turns on black whenever the actor actually blinks. So sometimes you see him in the mirror blink, and then it turns to black as well. So let's take a look at this video. Should we turn down the lights? Director Gaspar Noé's idea for his film, Enter the Void, was to follow the viewpoint of a druggie who gets shot. He puts us, the viewer, into the mind of the character, and we experience his final hallucinations as his life fades away.
It was a very risky movie. We're inside the head of a guy who's doing drugs, and you can follow his perception.
While the film was inspired by Lady in the Lake, a 1947 film shot entirely in a first-person perspective, Enter the Void itself is a loose interpretation of a Buddhist book about the afterlife.
Tibetan Book of the Dead? I'm assuming it's about death.
Well, it tells you how your spirit comes out from your body after you die.
And as such is an example of shapeshifting, the 7th creativity hack in our new series. Director Noé uses shapeshifting to come up with a story that in itself is a genre bender, by bringing a 2001 Kubrick approach to the drug heist genre. He calls it a psychedelic melodrama where the viewers themselves experience dying as if they were on drugs. Thank you. I have to give credit. I actually didn't edit this first minute. That was actually done by Andrew Zepp Boat, who's interning with me right now. So he did a first step, and I think he did an awesome job. And we're going to move on to the next one, and that's theft. And so what you're doing there is there's honorable theft and sometimes not so honorable. You're incorporating someone else's work either temporarily, midway the creative process, or permanently, and either blatantly or after a graceful transformation. Jim Jarmusch said, "Nothing is original. Steal from anywhere that resonates with inspiration or fuels your imagination. Select only things to steal from that speak directly to your soul. If you do this, your work and theft will be authentic. Authenticity is invaluable, and originality is non-existent." So I took that to heart. I think that's very true. And so one way that I try to stay creative is I look out at what's happening at YouTube, and I found this guy called Nerdwriter, and he did a video called How Alfred Hitchcock Blocks a Scene. And I decided to completely steal that idea. And it turned out to be actually really good. When you look at the views, we're sort of pretty much a tie. And I'm gonna show you his first minute, and then I'm gonna show you my first minute. Can we turn down the lights?
Today I want to take a little bit of a closer look at a scene from Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece, Vertigo. It's an early scene in the movie when the retired detective Scotty, played by Jimmy Stewart, visits an old college friend, Gavin Elster.
How did you get in the shipbuilding business, Gavin?
Specifically, I want to look at how Hitchcock blocks this 5-minute and 20-second scene and how his staging of the characters adds to the story.
I'm married into it.
Now, I should say that there are two ways to look at this scene, from the perspective of a first-time viewer who has to take the information it presents at face value, or from the perspective of someone who's already seen the film and knows the true intentions and outcomes of what's revealed here. I'm going to take a look at this from the second perspective, which means that there's going to be spoilers, so just a heads up. So if you've seen Vertigo, you know that in this scene, Gavin Elster is spinning...
Okay, so you get the idea. It's an 8-minute video where he gets into detail of how Hitchcock brilliantly blocks a scene. And there's another master that I thought deserves some analysis on blocking. And I did this. Today I wanted to take a little bit of a closer look at a scene from Tommy Wiseau's masterpiece, The Room. It's somewhere in the middle of the film where the disillusioned banker Johnny, played by Tommy Wiseau, encounters his best friend, Mark.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
Oh, hey, Johnny, what's up?
Specifically, I want to look at how Wiseau blocks this 4-minute and 34-second scene, and how staging of the characters adds to the story.
I have a problem with Lisa. She said that I hit her.
What?
Now, I should say there are two ways to look at this scene. From the perspective of a first-time viewer who has to take the information that is presented at face value, or from the perspective of someone who has already seen the film and knows the true intentions and outcomes of what is revealed here. Now I'm going to take a look at this from a second perspective, which means that there's going to be spoilers. So just a heads up. So if you've seen The Room, you know that in this scene Mark is spinning an elaborate lie. Thank you. So that was one of the videos I spent the least amount of time on, actually. It took me 2 days to cut it because I had a script already. And I just basically changed the name out, and it was surprising how much sense it started to make. And based on the comments, there are a lot of people who really see the genius behind Tommy Wiseau's blocking. So that was cool. I'm going to do that again. So the next one is changing the rules of the game. Anybody know what the brand is? Coca-Cola. So back in the 70s, Pepsi had a huge problem because they couldn't get around this bottle, because they couldn't copy it. They tried creating their own bottle, and they could never compete. It would never sell as much. They would get a couple of percentage points, but they couldn't make a dent. So what they decided to do is to change the rules of the game. And they did some research, and they figured out there's an opportunity here that's worth trying. And so they came up with a different idea, which is the 2-liter bottle. And for the longest time, Coke refused to sell a 2-liter bottle. And they were losing market share just big time. And at some point, Coke had no choice but to cave. But at that point, Pepsi basically redefined what's important about a brand. They just realized, oh, people are looking for something that just fits more liquid in it, and we can take advantage of that. So now, that's something that you could think about, how you can change as a filmmaker as well, the rules of the game. And somebody that comes to mind is Casey Neistat. Casey Neistat was fairly successful as a filmmaker, but he was never really satisfied. So he changed the rules of the game. He started filmmaking on YouTube. And now he's a household name, probably arguably the most well-known vlogger on YouTube. And he still tells stories. But in a sense, he sort of found his creative niche by just not playing the conventional game of film distribution, theaters, and trying to compete with other artists or studios in that way. And he found success. So there's something to think about as you're creating art. So another hack is alternative craftsmanship. So find an irregular way to accomplish the same thing. Disturb conditioned automatism by using a different instrument, medium, procedure, or work environment to evoke new fertility and avoid a paved cow path. These are Tristan's words. It's very lyrical. So, for example, you could shoot your film on a Super 8 camera, and that might spark some creativity in terms of how you're going to shoot that film, because you're going to be limited in certain aspects. It's going to have a certain look, and you need to find a reason to have that look. Another way is you could write a script on a typewriter that forces you to commit to the words. Maybe having a computer and you can change words is what's holding you back. So that's one way. Another example would be singing while wearing a corset to change up your voice. Moving on. So I think that word is pronounced ALEATORICISm, and it's basically means playing with the factor of chance, letting chance to be part of your creativity. And I actually use this all the time when I do videos, and I'm starting to run towards a deadline, and I just need to paper my timeline with B-roll. Then I start randomly grabbing, for example, for YouTube, just movie clips, and they start to make sense. And by just randomly putting things in, it sparks my creativity, and I'm able to find answers that I wouldn't be able to find otherwise. But I want to show this poem by a French artist who uses this technique where he's rolling the dice and has figured out a system that I don't quite understand how he's going to decide what line to use or what words, but he figured out a way how he can still make sense, but let the die decide how this poem is going to work out. And it creates actually quite interesting art. Okay, so second to first, this is unusual mental states. That's the one that I have the least experience with. I think what they mean is if you're spinning in a chair around and then you start to write a script, it might turn out different. There might be some other things involved. I'm not sure. So I'm going to have to do more research on this topic, and I'm looking forward to finding some movies where that can be applied in a non-pharmaceutical, non-drug-related way. But the idea is that you're altering the perception of thoughts by changing how the brain is processing those thoughts. And then the final one is immersion. And immersion is where you're inviting artistic cross-currents by exposing oneself to a different infusion or placing oneself in a different environment, as this could fuel your own novel idea. So, for example, you could be sitting in a dark cellar, turn off the lights, and then think about how you're going to compose a score for a horror movie. Just because the environment is scary by itself, you might feel different about how you're going to create that score. I'm about to do a video on Saturday about Christopher Nolan. I think it actually applies to him as well for the movie Dunkirk, because I remember he told a story where when he knew he was going to do the movie, he got his friend and his wife, and they got into a little boat, and they crossed the channel from England to France to see what it's like. He thought it was going to be a pretty comfy trip, and it ended up being a 16-hour, pretty real, dangerous trip with choppy sea. And it made him realize how dangerous it must have been back then for the soldiers in World War II when they were trying to cross back from Dunkirk to get back to safety, 450,000 soldiers. And that's sort of how he started his inspiration for how he's going to tell the film. But then again, he's also doing something else here in terms of the creativity hacks. And I'm just going to play this video to see what he does as well. And this is the first 2 minutes of the video. This is suspense. We, as the audience, have enough information to figure out what might happen next. And we worry.
We wanted the language of suspense, which is the most visual of cinematic languages. You can create empathy for character just by virtue of the physical situation. You know, my feeling was, okay, you don't need characters who come on screen and through dialogue make the case for why you should care about them.
Just like the old masters, Alfred Hitchcock and Henri-Georges Clouzot, who both understood perfectly how to use suspense to give the audience enough information up front so that they can fear for the character. Christopher Nolan uses suspense throughout his films.
Just dive into, can they carry this guy on a stretcher across a plank without falling over, like that.
But he does something more with it, and it has to do with the way he structures his films. He calls it the snowball effect.
And I wanted to try writing scripts so that you braid together the three storylines, and they're continually rising in anxiety, if you like, or intensity. And so as one is peaking, the other one is starting to build, and the other one is entering the last phase of it. You're looking at me strangely. It's really fascinating, clearly overcomplicating it.
Cutting the three different storylines. And here you can see how the movie is split up into the different storylines here. In this video, I'm going to look at Dunkirk and how intercutting three storylines creates a continuous momentum of rising suspense. Okay, cool. Thanks. So Christopher Nolan is very secretive about where he finds inspiration, but clearly this has to do with some form of mathematics and geometry when you look at some of his work like Memento and so on and so forth. So right now I'm actually trying to figure out, because there's some really interesting connections in there between these storylines. They're really not parallel action in the classical sense of like what you would see in Godfather, for example, where you intercut between the baptism and the shooting. It's happening at the same time. This is not happening at the same time at all, but it still emotionally feels like it's the same state of anxiety. And so I think it'll be an interesting discovery to see how that plays out in that video, so check it out on Saturday. Thanks so much, and I just wanted to say, if you are in South by Southwest next week, I just finished editing this documentary, The Alt-Right Age of Rage. It's about the alt-right movement and the Antifa and how they collided in Charlottesville. Feel free to stop by and maybe we can hang out. Thanks so much.